Hello and namaste. Welcome back to another episode of the Almost Daily Zencast. I'm your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Thank you for tuning in. There's a lot going on in the world, and I wanted to talk about, briefly, all of it. I was sitting out front, struggling with my relationship with tobacco, with cigarettes. Been trying to quit for as long as I've been smoking them. And, some inspired energy sort of seemed to hit me. Do I sound like a crazy hippie new age nut job when I say things like that? Perhaps. But I literally went from feeling normal to actively engaged in the sensation of reception. And it wasn't words. It wasn't like I heard voices in my head. I just felt activated. And it makes sense to me, but it might not make sense to others. I'm sure plenty of you listening are like, yeah, whatever, dude. Happens to me every 3 times a day. It occurred to me, I was on Facebook, as we are wont to do most of the time, and scrolling through stuff. And it's a mixed bag these days. A lot of angry people posting angry things. A lot of sad people posting sad things. A lot of confident people posting confident things, etc., etc. One of my, sub-hobbies, to borrow from subreddit, I think. One of my sub-hobbies, in other words, a task that I do habitually while on Facebook that is a passion hobby of mine, is to make sure to not scroll past posts that are expressing an individual's sense of hurt and need for love and energy. Those of you who are listening and are already familiar with me on Facebook might have been the recipient of one of these. I'll chronically post a meme that is, bright red, a heart shape, and just says sending you love and energy. I have on occasion sent that to people at the wrong moment, when in the midst of whatever they were going through, which I obviously only have a tiny little keyhole view onto through what they are choosing to share on social media. That message hit them at the wrong time in the wrong way and was interpreted all not, and not received. And I've been told, I don't need your love and energy. I need X, Y, Z. And that's fair and valid, and I'm not critiquing that. But it's made me aware that to many that probably haven't shared their words this way at me, that it might just be a meaningless gesture. Others have said, have thanked me for the kind gesture. And I don't know if they intended to be dismissive of the act or of the notion of what I did. And I'm not implying that I think they were. But I see obvious room for that being a true and valid reaction or opinion. I keep saying valid, by the way, because I think all emotional experiences are valid. This is old wisdom, and it gets rememified in different words, but your emotions are totally valid. Never am I telling... I often speak against hate, and by that I mean the expression of it in words, in writing, and in action. Because that's secondary. That's a different level of what's going on. The emotion itself is valid. When you are sad, lonely, hurt, angry, violently hateful, or compassionate, loving, kind, etc., etc., all of those emotional experiences are entirely, completely valid. Never let anyone invalidate that to you. And never, please, also be on the lookout. It is each and every one of our responsibilities to be, as fair and as kind and as even keeled as we expect others to be. So never over-interpret anyone's words into thinking that's what they meant, if they weren't, if they didn't. Emotional states are valid. But as other, wisdom teachings indicate, it's not, life is not what happens to you. Life is how you respond to it. I think the same sort of pattern can be applied to emotions. Don't, I think I've seen this, we've all seen this somewhere on the internet. Don't let emotions run you. Feel the emotions and then let them go. That's genuinely the healthiest thing anyone can do about any emotion, good or bad. But I digress. So I wanted to share it in here because it would be too much for a text post, so I wanted to ramble about it a bit. When I send that image and other images like it, for me, as a practicing experimental postmodern transcendental mystic, if I may make up a self-identifying label for myself, that image isn't just an image. What's a fancier word for image? It's a sigil or a token or a totem. Think of it, for those of you who are already magical in your thinking, if I send you a meme, especially one that I might have personally written, to me that's a totem for the energy and the prayer or the magic that I'm trying to send you. And I hesitate to use the word magic because there's a lot of people overusing that word and a lot of other people who don't respect that word, etc., etc. And there's also so many different kinds of magic that all get lumped together. If I may go on a sidebar here, without sounding like I'm trying to judge or I'm not trying to debunk anything here. I'm trying to share an observation. Of all the people who profess a belief or an understanding or a practicing of magic, I have noticed, and it's a limited, very unscientific data set I'm pulling from, it's just my personal life experience, which includes a lot of research and whatnot, but of the people who express a true acceptance of magic in some form or another, there seem to be two broad categories, as one can easily draw two broad categories in any demographics. And that's those that believe and or practice a form of magic that, whether anchored in nature or not, was clearly created by man. In other words, it requires words and or objects and or the transactions of some kind, and there's transactional thinking in it, and that it generally is either burdened with dogma and or ideology, etc., 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 and has some sort of institutionalized history that has some sort of organization, a cult or otherwise. You know what I'm saying? That there's a whole humanness to it, a mankind, a man-madeness to it. And I'm not judging that. I'm just indicating that that is so. All right? I'm not spewing any hate at that. I'm just indicating that I see that and it seems valid. There are magicians of all kinds in this world. There are Christian magicians. Ooh, scary. I bet a bunch of Christians, not that a bunch of Christians listen to my show, but I bet a bunch of Christians would freak out at that notion. But there are legitimate real, true believing in Jesus and reading from the Bible people who also practice a form of sort of Christian magic. There's magicians everywhere, and there's magicians who don't call themselves magicians. Okay, back to my point about this, and I digress back to my original thought. The other sort of broad primary dichotomy, primary basket in this dichotomous, because from one group the first division is two, right? Then you get into thirds and fourths, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is all I'm trying to identify, is that one could divide magicians into these two categories. Those who practice things that somehow or another was crafted by man, with the aid of nature, of course. If it's legitimate and genuine, with the aid of whatever divinity they're invoking. And those that, and I'm not sure what the right terminology would be here. And I could be wrong about all this, by the way. I just think I've been observing this sort of stuff long enough and looking into it long enough that it's a thing I notice. I think that seems real. It seems to be, you can go back and see it again. Measure it again. This other group practices what might be considered organic magic. In other words, there are no human constructs about it. This is the kind of magic that I mean, for those who are not sure what I'm talking about. Breath magic. It has no rules or whatever. It's just got different kinds of breathing. You know what I mean? Now, even this stuff can get then pulled over to the man-made department and get buried under dogma and whatnot. But I think that the actual living of it is where I'm drawing the lines, not so much the way which has been preserved, right? There's breath magic, there's eye contact magic, there's silence magic. There's the magic that occurs because it occurs in nature under the alignment of just that right amount of conditions lining up, whatever those conditions might be. I call this, in my sort of, drawing of my own personal map of things, matrix magic. So the matrix, if I may go on a sidebar for that for a second, has a lot of different emerging schools or camps developing. And by that I mean that there's a lot of different little variations on expressing the theory of matrix. To lay out that example, there's folks who are convinced that we are not actual living, breathing flesh monkey envelopes, but that this is all a computer program, like an actual computer somewhere that is so big, so highly advanced that this simulation is that vivid, and we are either, just software or programming that believes itself to be, flesh pods with soul connection, etc. All the other beliefs contained therein, or in terms of being alive, and this is really just a video game like The Sims or something, or a simulation that some science agency is conducting for the purposes of who knows what, and that is the Matrix, and that it's then there's the one there's literally a camp based, I'm sure, or inspired deeply by the movie series, although these ideas existed before the movies, mind you. And as with all things, when it comes to our ideas in an attempt to describe that which we experience and call reality, and that thing itself, and I don't like to use the word thing, that process, that event that we call reality, that we diminish to one way or another as a place that we reside on, it consistently sort of goes, hey, it will tell you, reality itself will confirm for anyone willing to investigate under the right conditions of self, investigation, that the best solution to anything in terms of problems we face and these arguments we keep having about stuff is to just commune with the reality itself and let it share its wisdom with you, because it's not a place, right? It's something else. The word matrix has its lineage to the word mater, I think in ancient Latin and other roots, right? And it goes back further before. We lose track of where all language comes from, really, and we're just speculating. Even the best of linguistic history is massive amounts of speculation, because I'm sure that much more, if I may indulge in a sidebar within a sidebar within a sidebar, when it comes to the history, when it comes to understanding history, one of the silliest things that no one rarely questions until they do, and God bless it when they do, is how much history is possibly missing. Like, how many eons have gone by where we just left gaps of nothing because either we were not writing things down or not, whatever, for whatever reasons. It just didn't survive. And we're speculating about when these things in the ground may or may not have been, by the best of our ability. I'm not trying to debunk anything. I'm just encouraging the questioning of, like, well, the timeline could be off. Anytime anything's dated, it has to be remembered that there's usually a pretty big margin for error that's scientifically acceptable. And odds are, even with the best of all intentions, the margin for errors are narrower than they really ought to be, and our error is probably bigger and more spread out than we really care to acknowledge. There's plenty of evidence for that, but that's not the point of this episode. Mater seems to be the inspiration or the source for a whole collection of words, including matter, that which constructs this reality, if we stick only to a materialist model. It also is the source for mother, and arguably for womb. This place is not a place because it is a womb. And everything that lives shows us that, because it is a fractally recursive, self-referencing, self-similar womb. The reason, okay, so interesting example to sort of challenge everyone's thinking. There's a spree of, there's a movement going on indicating that certain massive rock formations look like trees, therefore, arguably, might have been ginormous, giant, like epically huge. The tops would be in space. Trees. It's not impossible. I'm not setting out to debunk, necessarily, because I don't know the answer. I just also I see the same pictures, the evidence of the, and they're usually tabletop, really flat, what science usually calls, the broken down hearts of volcanoes. Now, it is weird and strange that they're so perfectly flat. And there's plenty of ways geologically to explain that, but it is a very compelling argument that these are the base of ginormous trees that some giant civilization cut down. These trees would be so huge, it's crazy. But what's fascinating is, and I hate to muddy the waters, but plants are fractals, yo. So it isn't, that sort of empowers their argument in a way, because a fractal thing can get as big as it wants, as long as the fractal structure can sustain the scale. Fractals are infinite already to begin with. So any pattern produced and repeated and any level of complexity achieved therein can achieve massive epic scales. And to see what I mean, as I always often recommend to people, look up fractal zooms and watch it. It doesn't make sense at first, but stop trying to analyze it with words and just watch it. Let the shape of it tell you its story. So, okay, so giant trees, not impossible. Plants are fractals. You can see in the very mathematically precise way in which the floral or fort, is it fort? F-O-R-T-E pattern, or flort, F-L-O-R-T, yeah, my brain's a little fuzzy right now. The file isn't found on that word, but that's a real word. Ask a florist what the word is I'm looking for. The pattern of the buds and the branches and the leaves and the petals on the flower, etc. These are all mathematically precise things. Nature, regardless of her lack of calculators and supercomputers, calculates mathematically precise things all the time, because all of it is fractal. And therefore all of it is an extension of the one thing, fractally expanding. Now, conversely, one could apply the fractal argument against the idea that those are giant trees by saying, no, just whatever rock formation that is happens to have a very fractal pattern, which to our minds that don't tend to think fractally very much, but rather linearly and logically, which are non-fractal things we invented, we can rationally conclude that yes, it does look like a giant tree trunk, but it's just as likely that it's a particular geometric and geologic formation that shares in resemblance with its brother plants and sister plants some fractal features that make them look very much alike, but that have to do with a completely different set of procedures in terms of the matter involved. The matrix, I don't think, I could be wrong, I could be totally misled, but I've had enough experiences. Now, I'll give the computer program theory this much benefit. You can come up with any theory about why it isn't a computer program, and the program guys can say, well, they accounted for that, and it's included in the programming, or there's some system of systems monitoring for that, and it's included in the programming to have said phenomena in order to keep you from realizing that it's a computer. Okay, boom. At that point, it's not boom, it's Moab. Moob. As an acquaintance of mine from my day job was expressing yesterday, the opposite of boom. Like, I lost. My boom went backwards because they took it away from me. The reneging of the boom. But my boom is going to be like, okay, I've had too many experiences that indicate an organic, innately organic, energetic, multi-transdimensional, living phenomena. That's the total sum of my experience, research, intellectual quandary, praying, and meditation. That's my bottom line. With no disrespect to anybody else's chosen belief construct, which, by the way, is a form of ideology. And as some of you may know, if you follow me on Facebook, all ideology is mental slavery, and I'm not afraid to say so. My statement, not trying to sound better than anybody else, I'm trying to refrain from creating an ideology. Funny bit, by the way, speaking of this, if I may transgress and prolong this episode longer than originally intended. At my day job, this beautiful, wonderful place that shall remain nameless for fear that they may not like being associated with my controversial podcast, I have a really fascinatingly cool set of coworkers, people I consider awesome peers and professionals and friends, and even those that are just acquaintances. It's like, if you're there and my boss, who chose you, then you can't. My boss is sort of like a personal hero of mine. If you're listening, I mean that. I doubt you're listening, but if you are, I really do mean that. Lois, you're like a personal hero of mine. Anyway, I digress. So I try to be. I don't know. It's kind of like a big brother scenario for me. Like, I'm usually the oldest dude on the crew, although occasionally I'm not, which is cool. And everybody on the crew, is always really interesting, fascinating, bright, and fun to conversate with. But my point is, one of them, who's particularly snarky in nature and likes to get a little bit, snarky, because of a prolonged, I was away for a while and I came back, and in coming back, I've been a little bit more open and bold about my postmodern, experimental, transcendental, spiritual mysticism, per se, although I don't like labels. Anti-label, it's got to work its way into that label. And I've been asked a lot of questions, right? And suddenly it sort of built to a head, and then we got really busy with a new set of projects, as it were. And not that we weren't before, but like the pace picked up, and so we had to get a little bit more focused. But as a sort of snarkiness, combative, I don't know what, it was interesting and funny and kind of challenging. After having not talked about things of that nature for a hot minute, suddenly there was this chatter amongst them, my two associates, where I was just out of earshot, but they were doing it on purpose to sort of get my attention. They declared that they were going to start a religion based on everything I had said, which was just A, profoundly funny on a lot of levels, and B, horrifying, because it is genuinely the last thing I want to do, even though it is quite tempting, because honestly, there's good money in it, right? But I digress. Kudos to all that, and much love to everybody out there. I'm not going to see them a lot because I'm working on a very specific project where I'm going to be just sort of isolating Fox and not doing the usual stuff with everybody else. But I return to the flow of the actual show with 19 minutes left to go. So, Facebook. It's a horrible addiction. It's a horrible addiction that we must all quit at some point. But it's also profoundly powerful platform for, well, free speech. To put all the craziness into one category, and it's something that arguably we must defend and keep free. And it can be really overwhelming. And there is obviously, once you sort of become aware of how it works, and if you overdo it on the unfriending just because you disagree with people, you create echo chambers. It's very, very easy. Arguably, the platform might have been designed to do this. It's very easy to create echo chambers where all you do is sustain your own thinking and your own conclusions or your own previously assumed assumptions about whatever. And that's really unhealthy for, at all levels. And we don't even have to talk about spiritual level. Just at the level of progress and innovation and stuff. If we fracture ourselves up into so many echo chambers, the oppressors, those who oppress us for the sake of profiteering on everything, our birth, our life, our death, our illnesses in between, they profiteer on us. They don't have to eat us at the end of the show for them to be treating us like cattle. We are commodity. And mind you, we have been for a really long time. This didn't start with World War II. This didn't start with the creation of any one of the currently popular religions. Arguably, in the defense of the spiritual faith that can be found and discovered and activated within those religious organizations, which should be completely overhauled and or just abandoned, in my opinion. Because spirituality needs no organized religion, folks. Spirituality is direct communing with divinity. Divinity doesn't need you to build megachurches. Divinity needs you to love. It's that simple. It's always been the message. And that statement is undebunkable. I know because I've read all the books. I've read every religious book I can get my hands on in the last 20 years. And I've forgotten them all. I can't quote them from you, but I know that which I've understood from reading them. I can still a little bit, because I started out as a Bible thumper, for those who don't know. In my youth, I was quite convinced that Catholicism and the teachings of Cathol, whoever he and or she was, that's an Eddie Izzard reference for those who didn't catch it. I should have put on my much more serious sounding British attempt at, mimicking Izzard, but I didn't. My throat's gone a bit scratchy. Reeling it back in. I digress. Facebook. I've encountered some really interesting themes in investigating this platform, and that's one of them. And I try to share about it as much as possible. And I think that one is, while yes, it is exhausting to be surrounded by people who disagree and hate and spew hate or judge or are toxic about the way they interact with you. And I'm not saying everyone has to. It is always correct and appropriate to step away from engaging with people who are toxic. But one should also be wary of of overdoing it in that other direction. We should always be on the lookout for diversity. and not as some PC, government mandated nonsensical attempt at being colorblind, but rather an attempt at a personal security that we don't close ourselves off to people who are different than ourselves. There's a lot of room between different and toxic, folks. And keep an eye on that. And also, back to my original opening thing. So I've got friends from all over the spectrum, and I'm fascinated by the confluence of themes. I've got a lot of friends who are one flavor of spirituality or another. And I've got a bunch of friends that are atheists, anarchists. I've got every kind of ism out there. And the fascinating common thread is that the vast plurality of them would get really offended if I said, hey, you seem to be spewing some form of ideology. When was the last time you sat down and just meditated with nothing preconceived about what you're supposed to experience? And I don't mean that as I just think that the times that I've said that, people have gotten a little terse with me. And I think it's interesting. I could be totally wrong about every word that comes out of my mouth, folks. I know that. It's my opening, it's my keystone, it's my premise. I know that I could be completely delusional. The computer theory has got me over a barrel on that, because all of it could be made up. But I wanted to share with you that for those who might dismiss my sending you love and energy greeting card meme as just an image and sort of a nice gesture, I want you to know that in my universe, and if we must use the word belief, in my belief system, I am quite literally taking the time and energy and moment collectively, both at the time that I post it, the time that I send it to you, and during the times that I meditate, to broadcast as strongly as I can. And I'm not some master meditator, but I don't know how strong I'm broadcasting, but I'm literally using what meditative, spiritual tools I have at my disposal that I think I have explored thoroughly enough to understand for myself that they appear to work. And I'm sending you as much energy of love, usually with a few other, sort of adjectives thrown in, like compassion, forgiveness, self-acceptance, at you, for you to welcome into yourself, from me. In lieu of being able to stand before you and look you in the eyes and say, hey, there's love here for you, and giving you a hug, since I can't do that because y'all all over the place, I really do genuinely take that effort. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe doing that effectively does absolutely nothing, the way those who hate on prayer are convinced that prayer does absolutely nothing. And if anybody's curious as to why I choose to state that I am convinced that it does do something, beyond an article of faith as a sort of blind belief, I'll give you this. There's two components. One is that there's a confluence of evidence and research, both ancillary and sort of directly about this, prayer and energy transmission between people, to indicate that while it's varied and weird and hard to measure, there's some phenomenological thing that is undeniably happening there. And I don't have links, forgive me. This is an ad hoc, sort of off the top of my head, unscripted show. My research is, my research that I reference is not research I did last night on Google. It's research I've done over the past 20 plus years of my life in real libraries, in different places, different cities, different countries. But yeah. And so the second, sort of reason why this is my story and I'm sticking to it, is that I've had enough personal, direct, interpersonal experience with other individuals that either transmitted energy and love and healing to me in person, which is the most palpable and the most direct and the most really just undeniably real and organic, and like you can no longer, how the saying, once you've seen it you cannot be unseen. Once you have experienced a genuine sort of Reiki healing, there's a lot of people debunking Reiki, and I'm sure that there's a lot of unfortunate, inaccurate information being taught in some places, because there's always scam artists around this sort of stuff, as there is around everything. But my point is that there's a lot of evidence and from, in my life, personal experience. I'm not claiming to be a master at anything. I've never studied Reiki. I've taken the tack like Alan Watts. He only studied so far, but his pursuit of comprehension was to probe those that he researched with in the real places. I couldn't afford to go to all the real places, so I was doing that through books and whatnot. I never attached. Once I realized that I had to walk away from my Catholicism, because Cathold turned out to not be who I thought he or she was, and the history of the organization was just drenched in too much pain, misery, blood, usurping, raping, pillaging, and theft, for me to continue to take it seriously. And of course I was young and full of passion, and I'd been denied the opportunity to revolutionize the institution myself from within. So I eventually decided, leaving it was the right choice. From then on, I said, I will try on all the hats, but I will not buy any one of the hats until I've tried all of the hats on. Does that make sense? So from the age of like 11 or something, because my spiritual journey began at 9, and that may sound crazy or unbelievable, but I was a deeply, I had a very deeply surreal childhood in a very mundane way, and then, by 9 I was like, what the fuck is going on, without the WTF. And I started asking questions that no one around me, my mom did her best, and she loved that I asked, but no one around me knew how to answer. Most people just sort of dismissed as, childhood whimsical imagination. So why am I sharing this? I don't know. I guess because I wanted to reassure anyone that might have had questions about why I do that, in case you've noticed, or just share with it because it's meaningful to me, so that others who may not be connected to me on Facebook, or at least know that it's something that can be done. You guys, like, we can. Here's my point: if you're busy arguing and trying to debunk, or trying to prove other people wrong, or trying to get other people to be as angry as you about a particular subject or issue, or wrongdoing in the world, if you cling to the otherwise perfectly valid emotion of anger and hate, then you're just perpetuating anger and hate, and you're not healing yourself. And that's where it's at, folks. And it's tough. I know, it's really tough. There's so many lines of division. And here's the thing that everybody on all sides in any camp about any issue need to remember. Friendly reminder, folks. Separation is the original, I don't know if it's the original, the very first, but it's one of the original lies. We told it to ourselves. Separation is also one of the first steps of the divine manifesting of all things. So let's not get weirded out by that all things exist in the universe as mutually arising dichotomies. The evidence of that is simple. Can you have up without down? Absolutely not. right? You can maybe travel only in one of those two directions, but you can't literally only have up or only have left phenomenologically. It's all one thing, isn't it? And of course, left and right are as all things in our social world, mostly just constructs. They're just concepts. So Bob is back to my point about like love and energy and prayer and stuff actually working. Everything in this, and I've said this before in the show, and I'm just saying it again because it needs to be shared. As soon as we stop allowing that lie to enslave us, the lie of separation, and the reason that is the one of the most important things that isn't being addressed. It says, look at how wildly separated and divided and conflicted we continue to get. Groups continue to fracture. And only under high duress and calamity and crisis do we seem to reunite and abandon these ideological constructs that divide us. Every day I've been sending love and energy to everyone affected by the hurricane here and in all other places that may have been affected by it that we don't get, breaking news bulletin reports on the mass media about it. Because no hurricane, isolates its impact to just one locality. It had to have rained over a bunch of islands and stuff to get to Texas, right? So, unless it really just cropped up, I don't know. I wasn't watching the weather before it hit land, so I didn't really see the path it came on. But my point is, people are suffering all over the world, and we can choose to believe, and mind you, belief manifests. So if we choose to believe this, then the universe will readily blinder you to it. We can choose to believe that prayer and energy do not work. Or we can choose to transcend belief through the comprehension that all is energy. The entirety of matter is energy. This living womb that we live in, our mother, is energy. The matrix is indeed energy, which expresses itself through geometric shape and code. It may or may not be a big, massive, giant supercomputer on some space alien planet inhabited by giant-brained, creepy-ass, one-eyed monsters, but that play this crazy video game for shits and giggles while they live in peace and harmony, and we mutilate and kill each other left and right. But I don't think it is. I think that at every level of the fractal construct, it is itself an illusory, living, organic being. All of it being an illusion, as the ancients taught us, because it is a process of this cosmos to develop and cultivate that which is our consciousness, the center of the experience. This is like, I guess the best postmodern analogy, God bless it, has come from Rick and Morty. This is like that video game at Blitz and Chits that they sit down and play. And, Morty played it safe one way and got one life out of it, took off his helmet, and was freaked out, right? All that kind of like weird post-game freak out is hilarious. And then, Rick puts the helmet on, plays that same life a whole nother way. Well, that would be multiple people playing one life over and over again. It flipped that upside down, inside out. It might be a video game for God in the sense that it's actually a fucking computer, but it might not. It might be the living womb for the divine unity of consciousness that we call God. And in this space, all energy can be communicated across all distances instantaneously because of quantum entanglement and, a bunch of other stuff. I am out of time, folks. Thanks for listening to me ramble. I hope that during this session of listening to me ramble, you felt the peace, love, and grooviness, healing, compassion, self-acceptance, and the subtle invitation to look within, which is the typical bundle of energy that I try to send out every time I talk at anybody. about this sort of stuff. Peace out. Be good humans.